heat more. No, we need to heat less. How's it going, guys? I'm the Comic Foil. No pad today. Today I'm going to be doing something just a little bit different with this. So, as I said in the last episode, you know, we got through Elite Four. We were right by the Pokemon League. Especially when you're doing a Nuzlocke, you want a pretty well leveled up team before facing the Elite Four. So, speeding myself up a little bit here. I said I would do some level grinding before the next episode. Well, I've been doing a little bit of level grinding, but I decided why not try and like make a little bit of a thing out of it, because one, anytime I record, anytime I'm level grinding, I record the episode anyway, just so that if somebody does die, you can see it. Since I'm going to be level grinding for such an incredible amount of time, I thought you guys would want to... I mean, I might as well do something with all this footage. There's a lot more chance that somebody could die while I'm level grinding, which isn't going to happen because I'm being very careful. Pad would be understandably angry with me if I lost somebody important like Corn or Little Buddha. So, I thought maybe I'd make an episode about it because I've just been kind of wanting to talk about Pokemon and the state of Pokemon and the discourse around it leading up to Sword and Shield. I've wanted to kind of talk about this for a while now. So, I thought I'd use grinding as a chance for that, and then also, you know, I'll have it on film for you guys that at least a lot of the level grinding got done without me cheating, and we'll be able to see, you know, if Skulltula and Pawnstar evolve. I'll, you know, have that on film because it's nice. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk a little bit about Pokemon, and I'm going to do a super informal Q&A. I asked Twitter to give me some simple questions about Pokemon. So, you know, I didn't get a ton of them because I only posted a couple hours ago, and it was in the middle of the day. But, yeah, so rambling starting here. Sorry, this isn't the most interesting visuals. So, as you know, with Pokemon Sword and Shield, also I kind of wanted to give my thoughts with this, take the chance to do this while I'm by myself, because I know Pad has not a completely opposite, but a different opinion from mine about some of the like newer Pokemon stuff. Part of what's great about doing this series with Pat is that I know that we're both very long-time Pokemon fans, but that we both kind of look at the series very differently. Both of us are pretty excited for Sword and Shield, by the way. The big thing, I guess, with this, with Sword and Shield coming up. So we found out about what Sword and Shield would be like, what, like a year ago? And people were pretty much about it, Sword and Shield. But if there's one thing that really, like, nosedived the conversation really fast, it was about when they first showed off, you know, open world Pokemon, or, you know, how it's kind of taking an open world approach. I don't think it's too literally open world. And then with the caveat that, well, because they're focusing on new features and the graphics and bringing, you know, a mainstream Pokemon game into HD for the first time, that more than likely, well, no, definitely, they weren't going to do, not every single Pokemon from the past generations was going to be in the game. Now, all the time, each new game since Gen 3, really, has had a regional Pokedex that does not include every single Pokemon. So that part isn't new, but no, what they're more saying is that they actually... there's not going to be any way to transfer up Pokemon from Gen 7 or any previous games up, and that some Pokemon simply won't be available in the game even later on. So, like, usually you start with the regional dex, and then after you beat the Elite Four or whatever, after you, like, beat the game, you get the national dex, and then you can, you know, get every Pokemon that has been introduced in the series, basically, one way or another. Usually by extensive training, either from past games or with other players online, or different things open up. So, Sword and Shield is going to be limited in that regard. We still don't know how many Pokemon are going to be in its regional dex. I'm thinking it might be something like 500. We're going towards, like, how many Pokemon are we even at? At the end of Gen 7, it was over 800 Pokemon, I do believe. Chances are good that once Gen 8 is out, we'll be up to 900 plus. I don't think they'll add too many because they've been... Gen 5 was the last time that they really added, like, a huge amount of new Pokemon. Gen 7 and Gen 6 and 7 were a little bit more sparse with new species of Pokemon. But still, that's a lot of... So, this started the big thing of... It's the national dex debate of people not being excited about the new Pokemon games because it would not have the national dex. I decided I'd go inside for this part. Durance. That's not a good thing to train off of. So... And I think this started this really big, like... range of bad faith criticism towards the game, and I'm sure you've heard lots of other people with the same opinion that I'm about to give you right now. This won't be anything really new, but maybe you've never heard it from me, at least not this, like, this completely. So, here you go. I think people are being way too hard on the game before it has even come out. I'll try fighting this. I'm a little worried about its, like, explosion power, but I have type advantage and speed advantage and everything, so I think I can take it. Now, this caused another kind of what I think is a really nitpicky thing, which is about the game's graphics, and I'll get to that in a minute, too. But one, I really don't need the National Dex, and I mean, I love the National Dex. I am kind of a completionist with Pokemon. I have a fully collected... So, I've been playing Pokemon since the very beginning. I'm not using that to say that I'm a better Pokemon fan than anybody else, you know. Pokemon has a really huge fan base, and any kind of way that you want to be a fan of it is, you know, is equally valid. But I've had the game since they've been available in America. I was a little kid with my copy of Pokemon Blue version, and my sister had Pokemon Red. Played Gold and Silver. I never skipped a generation. Now, Pokemon Ruby and Sapphire was really strange, actually. I know probably a lot of you guys weren't there. But in Pokemon Sapphire, Ruby and Sapphire, Gen 3, this was the first time where this happened, where Gold and Silver, you know, there were some Pokemon that you weren't going to be able to get unless you traded them up from Red and Blue, and it was considered really cool that you could trade Pokemon up from Red and Blue. So that would be the only way that you could get Articuno, Zapdos, and Moltres in Gold and Silver, or the Gen 1 starters, or I think like the fossil Pokemon like Omanite and Kabuto and Aerodactyl. But all of them, there was a Pokedex that included all 251 Pokemon at the time. So if you traded them up, the game was able to... Oh, I don't like that. The game was able to recognize all of the Pokemon that existed so far. They were all in the game. Item here. Ooh, Wild Charge. That's a TM I didn't have before. Okay, so now we can run down here. But yeah, so then Gen 3 comes along, though, and even though Johto had previously, like, changed the ordering of the Pokedex, you know, they were still all there. In Gen 3 for Hoenn, the Pokedex you started with at least only went up to 200, even though there was, I think, like, 386 Pokemon in existence by Gen 3. Now, being a teenager, it looked like And maybe I just wasn't looking, because you could eventually unlock the national decks, but I don't know if that was even possible until, you know, later down the line. So, to me at least, and probably to a lot of other people, it seemed like all but 70 Pokemon from Gens 1 and 2 had just been discontinued, and I'm 13, there was no precedence for this yet in Pokemon. It didn't seem like, we didn't know if it was gonna be doing this, like, rotating cast kind of thing that the new Pokemon games do, where different Pokemon are in the regional decks every year, and then at the end, you know, there's a national dex that has every Pokemon available. So it seemed to me, you know, Pikachu was still in the game, like, Jigglypuff was still in the game, Vulpix, Psyduck, Wooper, they were still in the game, but you didn't have Dragonite, you didn't have, you didn't have any of the Gen 1 or 2 starters, you didn't have Clefairy, you didn't have Shuckle. Like, what kind of game doesn't have Shuckle? If you have the opportunity to put Shuckle in the game, you should put Shuckle in the game. No Ghastly Haunter and Gengar, no Bellsprout, no, I don't think Ponyta was there in the Hoenn National Dex. And at the same time, like, in the anime, because Ash was now in Hoenn in the anime, it looked like, you know, he had left all of his past Pokemon except Pikachu at Professor Oak's lab, so it also seemed like in the show they were just, like, discontinuing, like over, like, nearly 200 Pokemon. So I'm sitting there like, are these games never going to have Snorlax again? Are they never going to have Tauros again? Every once in a while, somebody would show up. I remember thinking, like, well, hey, there's still hope, because Meowth is still in the anime, even though he's not in the Hoenn Pokemon deck, so maybe it is still possible. Feels so stupid at the time, but my point is, there wasn't a precedence back then for what would happen with Pokemon that were, like, out of the games like that. Now there is a precedence. We've seen that, like, all the Pokemon come back, and maybe, you know, one, there's still a chance that, like, we're living in an age of DLC. They can always, like, patch older Pokemon back into the game if they wanted to. I don't know if they're planning to do that or not. Even if they're not, though, I don't really care that much. So, all these Pokemon were unavailable in Ruby and Sapphire, and there was no way to get them, because you couldn't trade up from Gens 1 and 2 back then, back in my day. That was the one place where it split. Since Gen 3, you've been able to trade up from past games every single generation leading up to now. Now, you won't be able to trade back in to Gen 8 from Gens 3 through 7. Like, sorry, but, you know, that's... I mean, there is a precedence for it, though. That's what I had to live through back in the early 2000s. And I was fine. So, eventually, in Gen 3, they reveal... Pokemon Coliseum. Pokemon Coliseum is coming out on the GameCube, and that's going to have... Ooh, Dark Pulse. It's going to have Dark Pulse. It did have Dark Pulse in it. Let's see what we can get instead of... So, Feint Attack never misses. Power Base 60. Dark Pulse is Power Base 80. 100 accuracy. Can also cause flinch. So I think we want to get rid of Feint Attack, yeah. Good job, Skulltula. But Pokemon Coliseum says, hey, we're coming out on the GameCube, you're going to be able to trade between Pokemon Coliseum and Pokemon Ruby and Sapphire, and Pokemon Coliseum is going to have a whole bunch of Gen 2 Pokemon that weren't in Ruby and Sapphire, so you'll finally be able to get, like, Bayleaf and Quilava and Croconaw, and through breeding, that means you'll be able to get Chikorita and Cyndaquil and Totodile. You'll be able to get Shuckle, thank God. Almost every Gen 2 Pokemon was now available that you catch as Shadow Pokemon in Pokemon Coliseum. And then purify the Shadow Pokemon and trade them over. You couldn't get Lugia yet, but you could get Ho-Oh as, like, if you beat the 100 battle challenge in Mount Battle, you would get a Ho-Oh. You know, Togepi was there. You still, some of the Pokemon that, like, evolved from Gen 1 Pokemon that were still MIA, like Steelix. Steelix was like, you'd see trainers with a Steelix. You couldn't get your own yet. But then it started to feel like, okay, you could, like, get other Pokemon that weren't there. Also, there was a little bit more hope, I guess. I don't know why I ran from that. There was a little bit more hope because I remember my friend had a Game Shark or an action replay or whatever that he could use to hack the game and put, like, Articuno and Zapdos in it. And, you know, there's no precedence for these kinds of things. Not as much, like, information about Pokemon games circulating on the interwebs. So to me, that was just like a hack. I didn't know if, like, Articuno and Mewtwo and stuff were really in the game, or if that was just some kind of weird action replay thing. Now it seems kind of... You know, if I heard that today, I would take that as proof that, like, oh, they must have plans later. But, you know, it was essentially Pokemon DLC without being DLC, because then Fire Red and Leaf Green came out on the GBA, and those were also tradable with all the other Gen 3 games. Then Pokemon XD Gale of Darkness and Pokemon Emerald. So between 7 different titles in Gen 3, all 386 Pokemon became available. Not so much Jirachi and Celebi and Mew and Deoxys. They were all still kind of like weird event Pokemon, so you had to like get to go to the right event or know somebody that you could trade. Or I had Jirachi actually from the demo disc for Pokemon Coliseum. Came with Jirachi on it. I know Japanese players had to get Jirachi off of a Pokemon channel. It was a weird time. One gen later, Manaphy would only be available as an egg that you got from the spin-off game Pokemon Ranger and traded onto Diamond and Pearl. But ignoring that... Okay. I'd prefer if you didn't use a Dragon move against Corrin here. Okay, you're taunting. That's fine. So now I'm gonna outspeed you and I'm gonna kill you. I switched Corrin out from the front of the party so that I could train some other people, but here I am still using Corrin to solve all my problems. I think I'm going to have a massive disparity of levels by the time this is all said and done. But... So the way that, like, different Pokemon came back to Gen 3 over time, I guess, was part of what really captured my imagination. Because then I was freaking in. So I got really close to completing the National Dex in Gen 3. And then in Gen 4, I traded up all of my Pokemon from Ruby, Sapphire, Emerald, Coliseum, XD, Fire Red, Leaf Green, because you could do all of that. And put the entire collection together... Oh, fire doesn't work there. Put the entire collection together, all onto Pokemon Pearl version, and had a complete Pokedex of, what, like 493 at the time, stopping with Arceus. I traded with people who had gone to the events or, like, got the e-reader cards, you know. So that was taken care of. So I got, yeah, I got Arceus and got Shaman and all of that good stuff, Darkrai. And from then on, like, Gen 5 came out, and I would complete the National Dex in every new generation, because it would just be a matter of trading my completed Pokedex from the last generation up, and then getting all the new guys. Now, the sad part about this was that it kind of made me lose appreciation for a lot of the older Pokemon, because I would play through, you know, X and Y, and there's like a Snorlax that's asleep on the route again, calling back to Red and Blue, and I couldn't really be excited about it because it was like, oh, well, I already have a Snorlax. Also, this was a living Pokedex, so I would have like one copy of every Pokemon. Like in an evolutionary line, I would have a Dratini and a Dragonair and a Dragonite, a Bulbasaur and an Ivysaur and a Venusaur. I was very extra, and I had them all in number order in the PC. So, like, if I found a rare Pokemon in the wild in one of the later games, like Larvitar. Larvitar is a rare spawn, but I didn't care because I've had a Larvitar since Gen 3, because I bred it off of my Tyranitar that I got from Pokemon Coliseum. So, it was this weird thing that going through each new Pokemon game, I was really only looking for, catching, and training Pokemon from the new generation. Okay, let's forget a move for Night Slash then. The user slashes the target, the instant opportunity strikes, critical hits land more easily. Is that better than Feint Attack? It's definitely... That's a little better than Feint Attack. How does that compare to Assurance? If the target has already taken some damage in the same turn, this attack's power is doubled. That's not super likely to happen. That's more situational, so I'm going to take Night Slash there. So I guess part of it is, now that I know that I'm not going to be able to trade all of my Pokemon from Sun and Moon up to the new game, it's bittersweet, because that's a lot of work that I wouldn't say is for nothing. I still get to say that I had a completed Pokedex up through the first 7 generations. But, you know, the train ends here for them. But on the other hand, it's a chance to, like, really start over and get to enjoy everything I can find. This is why Ash, like, leaves most of his team at Professor Oak's every season, so that he can really get a fresh start. And now I get to enjoy finding Pokemon in the wild again, besides just the new guys. You know, that's the kind of rush that I didn't have anymore, and that's why I have to do crazy Nuzlocks to feel appreciation for Pokemon games anymore. It was a weird limitation that I had unwittingly put on myself. Now, just because that's my story doesn't mean that has to be how anybody else feels about the National Dex. A big thing is competitive Pokemon. And I'm interested in competitive Pokemon. I don't play Pokemon competitively. But there are some people who battle Pokemon competitively, don't want to just use, like, Pokemon Showdown to, you know, make the teams automatically. They want to do it legit. And so don't like it because, like, their best Mons that they've been training aren't going to be able to come with them to Sword and Shield, and there's a lot of worry about the meta getting messed up. As far as, you know, worrying about competitive Pokemon goes, the most interested I was in that was Gen 6, actually. I had some actual competitive teams in Gen 6. Not that I was, you know, really great or anything, but that's when I did the most, like, EV training and IV training and stuff like that. And that's, you know, so I put a lot of work into that. So I'll tell you what felt like the real waste of work was going from having competitive teams in Gen 6 to going to Gen 7 when things were less about Megas now and more about Z Crystals and Z moves. That's the part that felt really weird to me. That's when I felt like maybe I had wasted time working on this in such a way. So do I think no National Dex is going to ruin the Pokemon experience for me? No, absolutely not, because I'm not going to let it. I like Pokemon not merely as, like, training my competitive Pokemon or completing a checklist, but I like it for seeing the new designs and seeing the worlds and stuff like that. Granted, Pokemon stories aren't always, like, super deep. They're not always super engaging plots. The plots are kind of there as a reason to, you know, play through the world, but I'm still always interested to see what's new. I liked the story of Sun and Moon a lot, actually. I liked it so much that I was kind of disappointed with the changes they made for it for Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon, which is going to bring me to another point later, actually. But I need just a little bit more power on Lil Buddha to be able to get away with that. Now, the part where this really stops making very much sense to me, though, is... So some people... Oh, Paralyze. I don't like that. So some people really, really don't like the absence of the National Dex, and I can understand that. You know, it's bittersweet for me, too. But they didn't like that it doesn't have the National Dex. It's, like, ruining their... it's ruining what the game is for them. And I can respect that, because Pokemon is a different experience for a lot of different people. People play it for different reasons, and some people play it specifically for that completionist aspect that this is kind of hampering. I get that. If you don't want to get Sword and Shield, that is fine. And if you don't want to get it because there's no National Dex, that is fine. Don't let people bully you just for being upset about that. But a lot of people seem to feel the need to justify a new hatred of the series because it was moving in this direction. And that's when they started, like, nitpicking at stuff, which I find kind of weird. So this is where we get into graphics. Now, when asked about it in interviews, some of the developers of Pokemon were quoted as saying that the reason why every Pokemon would not appear in the game was because it just wasn't feasible to do all the animations for those Pokemon. This is a much higher graphical game. They're making new graphics and stuff like that. And people attached to that saying in the interview of, like, what was probably partially an on-the-spot answer. So then you have people combing through the trailers and trying to find textures and stuff like that and be like, oh, they said they'd make good graphics to make up for the fact that there's no national dex, but look at how bad the graphics are. So, you got that freaking tree. You got that freaking tree from the one trailer, and they're like, look, it looks like an Ocarina of Time tree. And, you know, again, people play Pokemon for lots of different reasons, but I don't know many people who ever played Pokemon because they were graphically advanced games. Like, Pokemon is always kind of limited in its budget. Like, I thought it was kind of a big deal that, like, all the Pokemon here in Black and White bothered to, like, have an idle animation during battle. Like, it's crazy to me that they did that for 500-some Pokemon. Like, when Pokemon Stadium came out for the N64, you know, that's like a super bare bones game too, and I don't want to make that like the champion of Pokemon games otherwise, but people were so excited to see their Pokemon in 3D, they didn't care about how limited the 3D graphics looked, they were just excited to see the Pokemon in 3D. Now, the fact that by the trailers, you know, one, it clearly says at the bottom of the trailer, and this is true of any trailer for any video game that is like months and months away from releasing, the trailer does not necessarily reflect the final product. You know, they're still working on the game. This isn't necessarily what it's going to look like. Stop being a douche because one of the trees are low res. How much do you care about the resolution on the freaking trees? It's a Pokemon game. Pokemon, you play Pokemon because you like how the Pokemon designs, because you find the world charming, because you like the, you know, surprisingly deep gameplay of it, or because you like how simple and, like, accessible it actually is for you. Or maybe you play it to, you know, make the best team and fight competitively. You don't play it because of the trees, and that's just the most nitpicky stuff. Now, I get it that if they tell you, oh, we didn't put this thing you want in the game because we're going to work on the graphics, and then you see that the graphics aren't very good, maybe you're kind of annoyed because you think that means they shouldn't have taken out your national dex that you like so much. But I think you're taking a few, you know, leaps in logic there, and picking on a trailer that, you know, for a game 6 months out, they're clearly not showing us everything. Then you get, like, people saying, like, oh, look, it's, like, using the same animation for, like, in the, like, Pokemonomy, like, the playing with your Pokemon area. You know, they showed, like, the evolutions jumping, and they were like, oh, look, the animation on Umbreon is the exact same one they used for in Pokemon X and Y. They're so lazy. You're damn right it's the same one they use in X and Y. They're not gonna make the animations from the ground up every time. That's not what video game studios do. That would be a waste of time and resources if they were gonna start it all over. Like, Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, you know, used Smash 4 as a, you know, as a foundation to start work on. That doesn't mean they just copied Smash 4 and didn't put anything new in. What a silly argument. And I get it, you're mad, but that's just... So, you want all, you know, nearly 1,000 Pokemon. All of them are going to have a walking animation and maybe even a running animation now because they're on the overworld. They appear on the overworld now. All of them need an animation for doing a melee attack, a special attack, one for getting hit, one for fainting, and some kind of idle standing animation. And some of them are going to need special ones for special, like, signature moves. So take, like, 1,000 and multiply it by how many different kinds of animations I just said. So you're getting upwards of, like, 8,000 different animations that you need to do. Nah, fam. I do not expect them to just do that. Yeah, I think I can take out a Fracture this way now. I know they're a little bit scary, but I have more levels and I'm a Steel type, so I think I can handle it there. So as far as Sword and Shield, though, I do want to be honest about something, which is that, you know, I do get nervous about how good Sword and Shield is going to be so far, and I'm not very critical of Pokemon games, I think, considering how critically I like to think about things. I generally just try to like things. I usually try to use my critique powers for good to enjoy things more, and with Pokemon games especially, I'm just like a Pokemon fan, and I can overlook a lot of stuff. So, the part of naysayers to Sword and Shield that I want to kind of defend is that some people aren't as up on some of the more recent things that Pokemon games do. Like, if all you want is the national dex and a good battle system and stuff like that, I can see how it's a little bit of a spit in the face to have a Pokemon trailer in the Nintendo Direct talking about, like, the curry dex and how you can collect hundreds of kinds of curry. I'm not saying that's a bad addition, but I mean, yeah, that doesn't do anything for me. It's not like that curry being there means that you can't have a national dex. Like, they didn't cut the national dex for the curry dex, but I understand how it can kind of feel like that sometimes. I'd also say, so I think X and Y was a really beautiful jump into 3D for Pokemon. But there was sort of little weird things with X and Y where the game felt incomplete, where it felt like more could have been done. And I guess that's something that has always kind of felt like that with Pokemon. It always kind of feels like there should be a little bit more. Like, they add legendaries that you can only get at events, and the legendaries seem like they have all this lore surrounding them and stuff, and that it should be some big event to get them, but you just, like, get the code and get it through Mystery Gift, and, like, here you go, here's your Volcanion. Even though, like, it seemed like in X and Y there was, like, a specific place to go to get Volcanion. You know, there's this whole, like, power plant area that it, you know, like, draws attention to. Is that where we're gonna get Volcanion? No, we're just gonna hand it to you as a mystery gift. You know, it feels a little weird. I think... So remember that Game Freak is a second-party developer. Game Freak, the Pokemon company, whatever you want to call it. Oh, you probably have Flash Fire. This won't work. Yeah, I forgot. They do cut corners, and that's just something they do to, you know, get a big Pokemon game out in a timely fashion and get it to people. And they usually try to, you know, do good on the stuff that people are excited for. And then, you know, we'll see about the other stuff. Post-game has been a thing for a while. Gold and Silver had a really robust post-game that was kept for the, that was kept for the remakes, and Gen 3 introduced... It didn't let you go back to old regions like Gold and Silver did, but Pokemon Emerald and Heart Gold and Soul Silver had, like, the Battle Frontier. Was the Battle Frontier in Heart Gold, Soul Silver? I actually forget, but, like, and Platinum had the Battle Frontier, which was, like, hard mode. Gen 5, Black and White 2 has the Pokemon World Tournament. I like that a lot, so it wasn't as, like, robust for people who just want to, like, have more story or have more places to explore as getting to go back to Kanto, but it did provide, like, a super hard mode and, like, a competitive kind of mode for people looking for that. And Gen 6's post-game felt really sparse by comparison, and Gen 7's wasn't much better. like, there was the battle tree and stuff, but I would really like to get to have, like, more places to go, more things to see after the credits roll, make the world feel a little bit bigger. I already said I wasn't crazy about Z moves in Gen 7, and I preferred Mega Evolutions in Gen 6. Mega Evolutions was a big change-up, and I liked it a lot. Z moves seemed a lot less interesting to me, and I kind of get the idea of it because Z moves, you get the Z crystals basically automatically through the story. There's a few that are, like, more hidden. And you don't need to get a specific kind of Pokemon and a specific kind of stone to get to use that of, you know, oh, I found the, like, thing for Mega Alakazam. It feels less exclusive. You can use this Z Crystal on any Pokemon that has, like, a Grass-type attack or a Water-type attack. And then for, like, the competitive, there's still, like, you know, using the combinations to maximize that. I still like Megas more because I always really liked where if a game's going to add less new species of Pokemon, at least give more spins on old Pokemon. Mega Evolutions was a great way to do that, so now, like, Pokemon like Mawile have a point because they Mega Evolved to Mega Mawile, or Kangaskhan, or brought, like, Gengar back into the game. Z moves don't really do that as much, but it did, on the other hand, have Alolan forms, and I do love Alolan forms, and that kind of idea is coming back in Gen 8 with Galarian forms, and I love that. Just kind of, you know, breathe some new life into the Pokemon. Going from, like, a statistic point of view, a lot of the Pokemon introduced in Gen 7 didn't work very well competitively because generally speed stats were so low. There were some Pokemon that, you know, it was kind of disappointing to see how not good they were compared to old mainstays. That stuff's not as important to me, but it is kind of important, and I know it's very important to other people. I think the biggest thing was I was having trouble with the hand-holdiness. Like, there's a lot of forced tutorials still. I think it's up for debate whether or not older Pokemon games are actually harder, or if it was just that I was younger and didn't understand the mechanics as much. I would have to go back and replay Red and Blue to determine that, and I don't want to go back and play Red and Blue. You know, it holds a very special place in my memory, but a lot of stuff about Red and Blue, like, just mechanically does not work. I think what bothers me most about more recent Pokemon games, and it's not something where I would ever say I don't like the newer Pokemon games, because that's very, very not true. They're probably better all around. The mechanics are better than ever. You know, I really like the Fairy type. Even though I'm not into Z moves, you know, there's been more balancing. Weather isn't as much of a, like, unstoppable force. It's a lot more fair now. The Fairy typing was really good for balance and stuff like that. I guess, you know, it's up for debate. Did I say this already? Yeah, I did. The newer Pokemon games feel a little bit too easy for me, and it probably is just because I'm older. I'm reminded of a quote, actually, from... Oh, I can't think of his name. He's from a Star Wars story group. He made this in response to, like, all the people crapping all over The Last Jedi because it's just not as good as the old stuff. And he says, you know, aren't we lucky that all of the best media was made when we were most impressionable? And I love that quote too much, because it really just... It's all subjective. All of this is all subjective, and you can find more concrete mathematical details to explain why you like something more or less, but ultimately a lot of it is stuff that you can't pin down, or isn't necessarily better or worse. I don't like how much of Sun and Moon felt like unskippable tutorial to me. I'm personally not as big of a fan of friendly rivals, though that's not, like, a thing that I would rage about either. A real joyless experience for me actually was Pokemon Let's Go, because, you know, I must have played through Kanto Adventures, like, at least 10 times minimum. Some of them as Nuzlocks, Fire Red and Leaf Green, the originals, just replaying it in my own spare time, whatever, plus going back there in Gold and Silver. And while it looked really nice in HD and stuff like that, one, I didn't like the more weird, cutesy models of the people. The Pokemon looked great. And the environments looked great. I didn't like how it scaled down things. You know, it brought it back more to the original Red and Blue with things like taking out equipable items and abilities and natures and stuff like that. Or no, I think natures were still in Let's Go, but... it just... the entire experience felt so simplified. I'm actually not personally as big a fan of the idea of seeing Pokemon on the overworld. Maybe this is an old, like, tabletop gamer kind of mentality, but I like random encounters. I like not knowing what you're going to see, but I understand that's, you know, that might be more of a hot take, so that's just my opinion. I felt like Let's Go, and I play Pokemon Go still, but Let's Go just catching, like, copies and copies and copies of the same Pokemon so that you can sacrifice them and feed the candies to another Pokemon kind of just isn't in the spirit of it to me. You're supposed to kind of catch your Pokemon and feel like your Charmander is better than all the other Charmanders, not because you fed it a bunch of additional Charmanders, but because you trained it and gave it the moves that you wanted it to have. I think that's kind of lost in Let's Go, and I was just kind of bored with visiting Kanto again. I didn't like visiting Kanto without, you know, the enhancements from Fire Red and Leaf Green now. I felt like the entire game was just way too easy. I didn't even need to think about it. And, you know, taking out the mechanics, it really did just all come back to the rock, paper, scissors mechanic of choosing type advantage again, which, you know, is a lot easier for me now that I've been playing for so long and I remember most of the more strange weaknesses and resistances and how Bug is weak to Rock and Rock is weak to fighting and fighting is weak to flying and that kind of stuff. There is this kind of more simplified thing that bothers me, and things about the writing. I don't think the writing has gotten worse as Pokemon games go on, but for some reason it always feels to me like Pokemon stories have gotten worse. And the reason for that, I think, is because the graphics are more detailed now. So, like, I'm one of those weird people that I actually kind of like playing Ruby and Sapphire more than Omega Ruby and Alpha. Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire. I like the originals more. And it's just kind of a, like, tactile thing. I like, you know, the pixel graphics more. I like how the music sounds in the original more. It feels more retro, it feels more homey. And just different contrivances of the story. Like, Pokemon stories are really contrived. That's just the way they are. Stuff happens so that the plot can happen. But there's a part where you're on Mount Corona and you have... Or is it the Moonstone Mountain? I don't know. You're somewhere and you have either the Pokemon Magma boss or the Pokemon Aqua boss, depending on which version you're playing. You have them cornered, and you defeat all their Pokemon, and, like, the freaking, like you have, like, allies around you and stuff, and you defeat their last Pokemon, and they're like, oh, well, guess I can't take the meteorite. I guess I'm defeated now. You got me this time, but next time I'll win. And then he just, like, walks around you. And for some reason, that made more sense to me in Ruby and Sapphire with a more, you know, simplified graphic system where there's, like, any reason why you cannot be chasing him. When you see it in 3D, when you see 3D models of characters all standing around and you know this guy doesn't have Pokemon anymore, it's like, why the heck are we letting Archie go? What? Somebody stop him. He's gonna go do more evil stuff. Don't we have prisons in this world? What is going on? You know, that's the effect I have, and I end up, like, caring a lot less about the plot because of it. now that you have like 3D models with facial expressions and stuff, and they give them a lot of facial expressions, the new like designs for characters have a lot of thought put into them. And now they make gestures and stuff like that, but they make limited gestures, and that's something that I'm going to notice playing a story that, like, oh, they did the same, like, arm movement thing that they do all the time while talking here. Whereas, when it's in this kind of top-down perspective thing, I know that they're not literally just standing in place necessarily like statues, but that's more like the limitations of the game, and my imagination kind of more runs wild of the things they're doing, or why Archie could get out of that cave, or even like how specifically the Pokemon are attacking each other. Now that it's more detailed, there's like less imagination to it. I feel less that it's just like a simplified representation of a story, and more what's actually happening in the story, which makes the story feel more contrived. Does that make sense? I don't know, maybe just a personal thing. That said, I do actually like the story of Sun and Moon a lot. I'm taking it all with a grain of salt. I like it a lot. Part of my problems, and maybe I'm just like too old, but like plot twists are really easy to see coming, and like, oh yeah, let me pat myself on the back for guessing the plot twist in a game intended to be played by 7-year-olds, but like, the Aether Foundation, that was a good setup in Gen 7, I thought. You got Team Skull, they're your usual evil team group, and even just when the trailers were coming out, as soon as the trailer that showed the Aether Foundation was shown, people were already guessing, like, oh, they're gonna be the true villains and stuff. And it was like, yeah, probably, but man, the game doesn't even, like, try to misdirect you with that. The first time you go to the Aether Foundation, maybe it's just, like, things feel a little bit uneasy and you're not sure. But you go back there and there's no, like, immediately, like, the Aether Foundation grunts are like, hey, kid, stop him, blah, 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 and, like, just acting like villains immediately for, like, no reason. Like, they don't even pretend that they're not up to no good. And I don't know, it didn't seem to know how to do, like, a reveal. And that always struck me as kind of odd. I'm one of those weird people who actually kind of likes How for... How. I realize that might not have sounded like I was saying the word correctly, but no, the character How. I actually like him a lot as a rival. It helps that he's offset by Latian, who's your more serious rival. Also, How is one of the only people who I think has done better in Ultra Sun, Ultra Moon. So here's the other weird thing. Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon. I was very upset by those games, even though in some ways they're better. They came out so quickly after Sun and Moon, like a year later. So, like, I wasn't ready to replay through Alola again. They kind of advertised it like it was going to be, like, a lot of differences, where there are actually very few. It takes a while for the differences to really set in. And it, like, changed things about the story. It changed things about the original story of Sun and Moon that in some ways made things better and in some things made things worse. Like, I think Lusamine becomes a less interesting character in Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon now that they try to say that, like, oh, she was actually doing it all for good. I think it kind of makes Guzma come off a little bit less interesting. I think fighting How at the end, like, in the final champion battle, does not make as much sense, and that's what they do at the end of Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon. I think just for the sake of making it different, that doesn't hold a candle to fighting Kukui at the end like you did in, at the end of Sun and Moon, because, you know, you're fighting the Professor. That's something that we've never done before. Sorry if I'm jumping around a lot, it's not because I'm trying to hide anything from you, it's because I'm either taking breaks to cough and drink some of my drink, or my phone rang before, so I cut that out. Some of these are going to be, you know, a little bit choppy. I mean, like I said, the whole thing is just going to be me rambling to try and stave off the boredom of level grinding, while also paying as much attention as I can to not get anybody killed. But yeah, there's not really specific reasons that just in some ways, Pokemon Sun and Moon and Pokemon X and Y felt a little bit less for me, and Sword and Shield might also be a little bit less for me. But, you know, it's also going to be more for some other people. And you have to accept that sometimes things aren't always for you, because Pokemon is a huge fan base. They got a lot of people to please, and don't act like just because a decision doesn't completely represent your interests that, like, Game Freak screwed up by catering to somebody besides you specifically, or for making a mark that they think will sell their product better or make more people happy. If that means that you want to walk away from Pokemon as a franchise, you are completely free to do that. I'm sure you have really good reasons. Also, if somebody does decide they're just not into Pokemon anymore for these reasons, don't, you know, assume that it's for some stupid reason, or that they're just like a Gen 1er who hates everything. Some people like Gen 1 the best because that's just the one that they played the most, because they were kids then, and then they decided they were too busy to play video games. So if you ask them why they don't like Gen 7 as much and the more recent stuff, even though their Pokemon are better designed than the older ones, that's not going to mean anything to them. Kanto is what they grew up with. It's what holds a special place in their heart, and they don't play Pokemon anymore, and that's, you know, their decision. It's not wrong. We all just need to be freaking respectful of each other, alright? So even though I do have my reservations of Pokemon Sword and Shield, I'm pretty sure I'm going to enjoy it. I usually do enjoy things. Even if I get a little bit disappointed by things sometimes, I do usually ultimately end up enjoying them, and not everything needs to be the best one in the series to be worth a darn. I really like the look of Galar. It's crazy to me how little we've actually seen of the game so far. Usually, for how close to the release date we are, I'm used to us having seen more. I'm used to having a lot more reveals. Like, going into Alola, we had seen, like, most of the Pokemon already, and here we've only really seen a handful. Does that mean there's not as many new Pokemon, or does that mean that they're just playing their cards close to the chest? I'm not really sure. Critical hit from Durant there. But, you know, we'll see. I freaking love Sirfetch'd. I'm so excited about that. Oh, hey, TM for Dragonclaw. Okay. Corrin already knows Dragonclaw, but, you know, that's cool. Go out here. Okay, we'll train on this ridge now. I find that I'm having more success training outside than inside, because inside you get more Pokemon like Boldore or Durant that I don't always know what to do about. In the same way that I don't really care that much about Z crystals, how like Z moves I didn't think were as good as Mega Evolutions. Dynamaxing doesn't seem as good to me, but at least it means some new like Pokemon forms, which is kind of neat. So yay, Pawnstar is going to evolve. He's not going to have Pawn in his name anymore. He's going to be like Bishop Star. I don't know. He'll always be Pawnstar to us though. Like how Lil Buddha is still Lil Buddha, even though he's a big Buddha now. Alright. Way to go, Pawnstar. I'm gonna keep him out in front anyway, though, and keep... Or should I... Feeling a little bit conflicted. I do want to train all of these guys more, but I'll go a little bit further like this. Well, I don't know how long this episode's actually turning out to be yet, but I do know how long I've been rambling, which has been for 1 hour and 4 minutes I've been playing the game, taking breaks in my rambling, and putting most of the rambling into the episode. So, yeah, this is more of a podcast kind of formula, but I want to get to some of these questions here. So, on Twitter, I put out a call for a, like, Pokemon Q&A. So I'm gonna end this grinding session, I guess, with just a little bit of my thoughts on some of these questions. So more or less rapid fire going to answer some of these. So my first question is going to come from Bardock DX Skywalker. All these were gotten off of Twitter over the course of a few hours, by the way. Who was asking what my favorite and least favorite types were. My favorite type is definitely the ground type. Oh wait, no, you were just asking for my favorite. Somebody was asking for my least favorite. I wanted to know my favorite and 5 of my favorite Pokemon of that type. So yeah, unequivocally, my favorite is ground type. I like the idea of Earth element. Rock is also, you know, close to the Earth element, but I like how ground does it a little bit better. And I just find that a lot of Pokemon that I really, really like are those quadrupedal ground types. Not all of them are quadrupedal, but... So to give you a quick selection of them, Donphan's one of my favorites. I don't know if I can narrow it down to 5, but, sorry, that was me thinking of my moves, not the Pokemon. Donphan, Quagsire, Marshtomp, Swampert, not Marshtomp. Hippowdon, Onix. I actually like Onix in look more than Steelix, though if I'm using it competitively, I'm going to use a Steelix and Mega Evolve it. Nidoking, Excadrill, Mamoswine. A lot of really good ones there. Donphan is a really quick number 1 for me, though. I think Donphan might be one of my favorite Pokemon of all time. Cubone, actually, just because I think Cubone is adorable, and I like that he can throw a bone like a boomerang. Marowak is a little bit less adorable, so that one doesn't get my pick as much. I put a Snape out in front now, so that Snape can get a little bit more training. Dark Seraph asked a similar question. Also asked for my favorite, still ground, but also asked for my least favorite type. It's not like there's a type that I don't like. So if I had to make a few decisions, I'll just pick out some that I'm like less about, I guess. I would say rock type, maybe just because it feels kind of redundant next to ground, but I also, you know, I like my rock types too. I really like Onix. I'll just run from you. Forget you. Forget you. But yeah, I don't really have a problem with rock types. Ice is one of my least favorite to use. There's a lot of ice Pokemon that I think are really cool, pun partially intended. Just if I'm making a competitive team, Ice is the least likely one for me to put on that team. Oh, thanks for giving me the critical hit there, buddy. Screw you. Guess we'll bring out Corrin. Corrin's the big gun here. Oh, and you have U-turn. Yeah, that's pretty scary, actually. I should not be using Snape to fight those guys. Ice really only works as like a counter to Dragon, and luckily Fairy's around now, so you got Fairy, Ice, and Dragon. Those are the 3 that are strong against Dragon. Weird as that is. And yeah, it's just it's so Ice is weak to so many other types too. It's good against flying, which is like fairly common. It's good against Dragon, that's great, but it has so many weaknesses. It's weak to, I think, rock. It's weak to fighting. It's weak to fire. A lot of common types that make it just impractical to have an ice type on your team. It's giving you too many weaknesses and not enough added resistances when you add the ice type to something. So even though I like a lot of them, like Mamoswine, like I ran an Avalugg in one of my teams actually, just out of pure desire to get a good Avalugg. It's one that's least likely to use. Normal, just because it can be a little bit boring, but, you know, I like Snorlax, and there's a lot of other, you know, normal types that I do like. I wish there was, like, one other better reason to use normal Pokemon. because there's not a lot of normal moves that are too worth getting stab on. You get a immunity to ghost, which is better now than it used to be, now that there's like more ghost moves that people might actually use on you. And then the trade-off is that you're weak to fighting. It used to be that you were just kind of weak to fighting because it's not like your opponent was going to use like Lick on you or what's that one really bad one? I can't remember. But yeah, normal is definitely a less exciting one. The only other one I'll say is fairy. And again, I don't hate any of these types, and I don't hate fairy. I really like the idea of the fairy type, and I like how it balances things. I think it's just a little bit overpowered. I think it needed one more weakness. Next to water, it's like one of the best resistive types from like a pure matchup standpoint. It's one of the best types defensively. So they made it so that fairy type moves aren't very effective against fire types. And I think they should have also made that, like, reciprocate. Like, fire type was super effective against fairy. Wouldn't that have ruined everything if fire beat fairy? It makes sense, right? Because you got, like, fae, forest spirits, whatever. Burn them down. So I just think that's a little rough. And the other problem with fairy type Pokemon was having to, like, retroactively change a bunch of Pokemon to be fairy type. It gets a little confusing what Pokemon are and aren't fairy types, especially because you have, like, we used to call them the fairy legendaries, like Mew, Jirachi, Celebi, and none of them are fairy types, and, like, does Celebi not look like a fairy to you? Come on. I probably should have Metal Clawed, actually. I need a better steel move on Pawn Star. A lot of Pokemon, like, why isn't Blissey fairy type? Well, because that would be terrifying. That would be freaking impossible to kill. But it looks like it should be a fairy type. It's been getting harder and harder with each generation to be able to guess what type a Pokemon is just by looking at it. It's getting tough. SwSh is a fighting type Pokemon. Like, okay, like, I get it, but it wouldn't have been my first guess. I would have guessed, like, grass, flying, whatever. So yeah, fairy, rock, ice, and normal are all tied for my least favorite type, I guess, even though I don't actually dislike any of them. Cartoon Critic wanted to know what my favorite region was from a lore perspective. That's an interesting question. Now, are we saying lore as in story in general, or just backstory? Because Unova, I think, overall, like, Gen 5 has my favorite story. I certainly like it a lot more than Pad does. I don't think it's always executed really well, but I like the ideas of it a lot. It gets more interesting in your head than it is actually on the screen and in the text. And some of the lore between that and the ancient dragons and stuff is pretty cool, too. But as far as, like, backstory stuff goes, I'd say either Unova, because it's got all the, like, spirits and stuff like that, and... Ooh, that's a little rough. Now let's change the corn again. Gotta play it safe, guys. Gotta play it safe. Or Sinnoh, because while Sinnoh's far from my favorite region and my favorite gen, it did bring a lot of really juicy lore to the series. That whole town that has a library where you can find out all kinds of crazy stuff about the backstory of Pokemon. That's really neat, and I really like it. Aqua Fantasy asked me, what Pokemon would you like to have in real life? Oh, man. One, like, freaking any of them. But, off the top of my head, Bulbasaur is just, like, such a lifelong friendo to me. I would love to have a Bulbasaur that just hung out. Having a Snorlax would be really cool. I say a lot, actually, that Snorlax is the Pokemon I most wish actually existed, and that's because I want to just, like, sleep on one. It looks so soft to just sleep on a Snorlax's sleeping belly. It's like My Neighbor Totoro. Or something I could ride. Like, I'd really like to ride, like, an Arcanine around, or something like that, to be able to ride Arcanine to work and have it extreme speed me wherever I want to go. Those are all Gen 1s, but keep in mind, I grew up in the 90s, so, you know, those all hold a really special place in my heart to me. Really, any kind of Pokemon that could, like, be my friend and listen to me with the same intelligence as, you know, Pokemon do on the show and stuff like that would be unreal to me. John Melly asked, what was your first Pokemon game? I did just cover that while blathering, but it was Pokemon Blue. I have been playing Pokemon since the very beginning, because that's just when I happened to be alive. What move was that? That wasn't a Rock-type move, was it? Because that's a little bit scary. Going through the full list, I played Pokemon Blue, Pokemon Yellow, then I got Silver, and I got Crystal, and I got Sapphire, and then, you know, Colosseum, Fire Red, Leaf Green, eventually came around and got Ruby also, and Emerald. Pearl, I never played Platinum, actually, and I've only played a little bit of the Gen 2 remakes, which is one of my biggest regrets for this series of things that I'm, like, missing out on, is Platinum and either Heart Gold or Silver. My original trip through Gen 5 was White, and then White 2, Pokemon Y, then Pokemon Sun, and then Pokemon Ultra Sun, and all kinds of spin-offs in between then, Let's Go Eevee, you know, Pokemon Snap, all that kind of stuff. So I have never not been with the Pokemon series. There was a time when I didn't have a lot of expendable income with, like, Platinum and the Gen 4 remakes that I had to give a miss. Oh, also I have a Alpha Sapphire in there. Okay, I'm gonna try air slashing you and hope you die quickly. Yes, okay. I can one-shot these things, that's good. Axel has a huge list of questions for me. Thank you for all these, actually. Favorite move? Oh boy. Probably Earthquake, not just because it was the dominant strategy of Gen 1 to just give Earthquake to something and keep using Earthquake, but because it's the most reliable move of my favorite type. So, there you go, Earthquake. I could probably think of a more fun answer, but maybe not off the top of my head. Favorite gym leader would be... Ooh, that's tough. I always really liked Winona's design from Gen 3. Gen 3 is probably one of my favorite gens all around. That and this one, Gen 5. And, I don't know, Norman is just really cool because, like, you're fighting your dad, and at least at the time when I was first playing it, it felt like there was so much build-up, and he was so difficult for me to beat, so that was, like, a really fun challenge to overcome. And I like, you know, how he's using Slacking, and that's kind of like, Slacking is a game changer because he's so powerful, but he only moves every other turn. And he's using stuff like Yawn and stuff like that. He doesn't have a lot of specific weaknesses. I wasn't using fighting types at the time, so that was a grueling fight for me, and it was really cool. It was really super memorable, I guess. It's funny because Oscar and Joe and I did a, like, run-through of, like, favorite gym leaders from all different gens, and now I kind of forget that whole conversation, but I guess I want to say Norman, I guess. Favorite NPC? That would be N from this game. I just think N is really interesting. I think for the ideas that are in this game, it's a shame that the writing isn't a little bit better, but N is such a space cadet, and when you really think about his life situation, it, like, makes a lot of sense why he's such a freaking weirdo. And he wants to do the right thing, but his sense of right and wrong is a little bit warped based on the way that he grew up. But he's, like, somebody who really wants to challenge their own beliefs in this story, so yeah, I like N a lot. I think he's an interesting guy. Favorite type combos. Anything that combos with ground type is a really cool combination to me. Torterra, which is a Pokemon I didn't mention before, but, like, grass and ground, and it's depicted as, like, a continent on a turtle's back. That's so freaking cool. Also, Ghost plus anything else. I like the Ghost type a lot, so... yeah, that leads to a lot of cool combinations. That's not where I meant to fly. Favorite item? Probably just good old Leftovers. Equip it to something, and it heals a little bit each turn. Great for doing stalls. I do love me some Toxic Stalls. I had a pretty sick Umbreon Toxic Stall that I liked a lot. that I used in Gen 6 competitives. And favorite double battle combo. This strategy is a little bit outdated, but I liked either having like a really defensive steel type like Registeel or a ghost type, and pair them up with something that knows explosion, because at the time explosion could reliably kill both targets on the other side, and it wouldn't hurt your ghost type and it wouldn't hurt your steel type very much. I loved doing that to people. I could make an entire team based on Pokemon that either exploded or avoided explosions. I love that kind of wacky stuff. Zephyr Revolution asked me, what is your favorite Pokemon spin-off, or some of your favorite Pokemon spin-offs? Sadly, I never really got into the Pokemon Mystery Dungeon games. It's something that I think about doing every once in a while, seeking out like Explorers of Time or one of the good ones. Because the only one I ever played was Pokemon Blue Rescue Team, and that just probably isn't the best one to get an impression of the series. But if Pokemon Coliseum and Pokemon XD count as spin-offs, then those, and yeah, of course they count as spin-offs. Pokemon Snap, I would really like a new Pokemon Snap game. I feel like there's so much more potential that they could do with that. Those would probably be it. The whole, like, bringing Pokemon battling onto a console idea is something that's going to be... Oh, yeah, this is a little dangerous here. I probably should not have kept battling with this, but we're okay. You know, now especially because the new games are going to be on consoles, we don't really need a Pokemon Stadium kind of thing anymore, so... But it is kind of sad to, like... I think it should at least be appreciated that even though Pokemon Stadium and Stadium 2 were a little bit bare bones, they were not as bare bones as Pokemon Battle Revolution, plus they had mini-games. And the mini-games were super tight. Pokemon Stadium 2 also had a trivia game where it was you versus your friends at Pokemon Trivia, and I love it. Also, Pokemon Puzzle League on the N64. I never played Pokemon Puzzle Challenge, which is the same thing on the GBA, but Pokemon Puzzle League, because it's basically Tetris Attack or Panel de Pon, whatever you want to call it, and Panel de Pon is awesome. Interesting question here from Golden Mage. If you had to delete any generation from the Pokemon series, as in those games, all the Pokemon in them, any mechanics they introduced, etc., just didn't exist, which one would you pick? Oh, that's tough. Like, mechanically, Gen 5 maybe added the least to the series, but also, like, it's kind of a perfecting of the formula to me, at least the formula as much as it existed at the time. There's a lot of great Pokemon in it, and I love its attempt at a story, again, even if it doesn't completely stick the landing. Oh man, I don't think I could do it, man. You got the physical special split in Gen 4, you got abilities and natures and stuff in Gen 3, you got whole items in Gen 2. The whole thing wouldn't exist without Gen 1, so I don't feel like I can say that. Gen 6 has Megas, so I guess I'd have to pick Gen 7. I feel like, as a time traveler, that least disturbs the timeline, and I'm not crazy about Z-moves, even though we'd be losing out on a lot of new Pokemon that I just really like, even if it's not Pokemon that I like mechanically a lot. You know, I really like Decidueye, I really like Rabombi. A lot of great-looking Gen 7 Pokemon would be lost, but I think that's the only choice I can make with any sort of confidence. Okay, and last question here for now. This is from Soul. Hey Soul, how you doing, man? Who asked, what would the team of your ideal rival character look like? Whoa. Okay, wait. What would the team of your ideal rival character look like? That's tough. First, let me give my opinion on rivals. So I don't think it's a rule that all rivals have to be jerk rivals like Blue. Even though I put Blue up as one of the more effective rivals, I think it's just that I need to feel like the rival actually stands a chance against me. Like, the least effective rivals to me were probably your, like, ragtag group of friends in Gen 6. Partially because they were just a little bit underdeveloped, but, like, this was the big reason why I felt that fighting How at the end of Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon wasn't as effective as fighting Kukui at the end of Sun and Moon, because... And I really like How. I like that he's friendly. I like that he's your, like, goofy friend who's behind you every step of the way. He's always a few steps behind. I like Charon and Bianca for that same reason, and Charon keeps thinking that he's better than you, but you always put him in his place. It's just for How to be beating the crap out of How the entire time, and then it to present How as your final challenge. And I'm like, I know I can beat this guy. It's How. What are you trying to pull, Ultra Sun, Ultra Moon? And I really like How, too, and I feel like that was just a bad decision to put him back as the final boss. That's why my least favorite is the one whose name I can't even remember from Pokemon Let's Go, because that's take out How's personality, but then still do that thing where he's, you know, he's friendly, and that's nice, I guess, but he's kind of useless to you, and, is always, you know, leagues behind you, because that game is so easy. And then it tries to present it as some big deal that you're gonna fight him as the final battle before you're named champion. It just doesn't have the same effect as fighting Blue, who... I mean, I guess you were always defeating Blue, just the same as any other rival, but something about... And maybe this is another case of, like, my perspective being warped because... You know, it was me when I was more impressionable. But even though you kept beating Blue, it always felt from the writing, how he talked to you, like he was so smug, and how he would always appear someplace like he's already been on the SS Anne or in the Pokemon Tower or somewhere for a while, and that you're just catching up. It did always feel to me like he was better than me. So it was a bigger deal having to surpass him one last time after fighting the Elite Four, after you're tired and battered from taking out the Elite Four also. Silver's kind of effective as a jerk-ass and also, like, a criminal, and he seems like a legitimate bad guy. And then they didn't, like, repeat themselves by making him the champion again, they just have a battle with him in Victory Road. Wally's got this great, like, underdog kind of story going, where, like, you know, he's just some loser that you helped be a Pokemon trainer. I'm glad he's not the final challenge, but having him at the end of Elite Four and having him have this, like, awesome team is pretty great. It's a pretty star-studded moment. Barry's good in that he's just, like, really annoying and a pissant, and you kick his butt every once in a while. So I think I would need my rival to at least appear like they were as good or better than me. And probably because I don't like using a lot of Pokemon that are, like, uber competitive, I feel like I have a more, like, quirky set of Pokemon that I like. I think they would have to be, like, really into the, like, meta Pokemon, the Pokemon that are, like, used by all the tournament people. So I think they'd have to have, like, a Talonflame. They'd have to have, like, oh man, who's overused nowadays? Because whoever's overused, that's what they would have to have. But, I don't want to give them a legendary, so I'm not going to give them Landorus. But, they would definitely have a Talonflame. Probably this would be Gen 6, and they would have started with Froakie so that they could have a Protean Greninja. All their Pokemon would have their, like, hidden abilities that make them actually good. Okay, so I just looked at Overused a little bit, and I think... So I think they'd have a Charizard, an Alakazam, a Talonflame... Yeah, maybe not Protean Greninja. Let's not use starters either. I just, okay, leave a blank space for their starter. If it was like Kanto, they would have a Charizard. If it was Kalos, they'd have a Protean Greninja, you know. But for now, just leave one blank for their starter. You know, they probably would have a Charizard because I would probably have a Bulbasaur. So they would, you know, counterpick me and take the stronger one. So yeah, Charizard, Alakazam, Talonflame, Garchomp. Try not to use legendaries. They would definitely Mega Evolve the Charizard, though, which means they couldn't Mega Evolve the Alakazam. I was looking at Mawile, but then they wouldn't be able to Mega Evolve the Mawile, so no Mawile. Maybe Magnezone? I like Magnezone a lot, so I kind of want it for myself. But yeah, let's give him Magnezone. And yeah, Tyranitar. So he's strutting around with a lot of, you know, pseudo-legendaries, but... Oh, you know what? No, not Tyranitar. He would have a Chansey. Not even a Blissey. He would have a Chansey, and it would hold an Eviolite. They would be using, like, all the freaking strats. You know what? You know what would happen? My rival would be Patty. Patty would be my perfect Pokemon rival. And to me, he would be that always, like, one step ahead, I don't want to call Patty a jerk rival, but he would be one of those I know what I'm doing rivals, like Red, or like, I guess like Charon's supposed to be, even though we keep kicking the crap out of Charon. Oh no, I don't have any more Air Slash to do that with. Should we try Fly? No, too dangerous. Let's switch back over to Corn. And then to Patty, I would be more like How or Bianca or Barry, where I would be this, like, hey, look at my neat Pokemon, I'm gonna beat you this time, and then he'd just, like, crush me. He'd just, like, slap me into the ground. So yeah, thank you for the questions, guys. I'm going to wrap this up in just a little bit. We're so close. I just want to evolve Skulltula while we're doing actual episode stuff, because... There we go. Oh no, you evolve at level 54, don't you? Ah, crap. Alright, that should be it. So, have I proven that I can level grind for a while reliably without losing somebody? Will you believe me if I just come back, you know, for next episode and everybody's leveled up to, like, level 55? Will you believe me that I didn't lose everybody? I hope so. I'll record it anyway, so, you know, maybe you'll get a sudden, like, oh no, I killed Snape! But, you know, I'm keeping my head on straight. Skulltula, you're beautiful. You're a beautiful vulture girl. So, hey, thanks again for the Q&A questions. Thank you for joining me on this grindcast, if you did. I'm going to take a break, probably keep on grinding, but the next time I see you will be episode 43 for the Elite Four. Pad will be there. Wish us luck in advance, guys, and thanks for watching. I'll see you there.